Welcome to the Business Call to Action's Champions Circle interview series. I'm Shivvy Jervis, and today we'll be talking to Dr. Paul Collier, Professor of Economics and Director for the Centre for the Study of African Economies at the University of Oxford, and also Fellow of St. Anthony's College. Dr. Collier is the author of one of the most influential series of books examining the challenges faced by low-income communities and fragile and conflict-prone states. His book, The Bottom Billion, has won several distinguished awards. And his latest book, The Plundered Planet, How to Reconcile Prosperity with Nature, has been called path-breaking for its analysis of how technological innovation, environmental protection and regulation are key to ensuring equitable development amongst the poorest countries. Named by Foreign Policy magazine as one of 2010's top global thinkers, Dr. Collier is currently advisor to the Strategy and Policy Department of the IMF, advisor to the Africa region of the World Bank, and he's advisor British government on development issues. Join us as we discuss the role of the private sector in contributing to the economic development of the world's poorest countries. Paul, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for inviting me along.
So I'd like to start by referencing your book, The Bottom Billion. In it, you argued that rich countries should not focus on sending greater and yet greater aid to poorer nations, but to instead encourage growth. Do you see rich countries or donor countries beginning to focus more on promoting market-driven growth and investment?
Very much so. I mean, a good example would be the British development assistance, DFID, which is now very much focused on helping the private sector in, really. So I think everybody realizes now that growth is predominantly a private sector process, but actually the public and private actions complement each other if they're done right. They're not competitors, they're complements.
Right. And Paul, in what ways can donor countries further incentivize investment in poor countries?
Well, I think the key concept here is the investment climate. It's what it's like in practical terms for an investor when they arrive in a country and try and make an investment and run a business. And there are typically kind of three areas that could really impede. One is just the sheer physical infrastructure. You go to some countries and you turn on the light and there's no power. And so that's clearly, where there's no power, no functioning infrastructure, that lowers the return on a lot of private investment.
Of course.
And so public help can advise both, it can provide both the finance and help the organization. And because what's failed in the past has not just been a shortage of finance, it's been a failure of organization to provide the basic infrastructure that business needs. So that's one area where a development program can help. Another area is trade policy. Very often, businesses will want to be able to export. After all, the typical country of the bottom billion is very small. So it's got a small market. So a lot of the investments will be outward focused. And in order to be outward focused, they need really good market access. Absolutely. And so, and always with trade policy, the devil is in the detail. It's great to promise, duty-free, quota-free market access. Look at the small print, right? So getting the small print right is really important. It's a complement to an aid program, is a good trade program. And then the third area is, if you like, the rules of economic governance. Nobody wants to be in an environment where it's unclear whether you get a deal by bribing. It's unclear what the property rights are. So helping countries, governments to get clear property rights, to clarify property rights, that's a big step forward.
How about the private sector? Do you see businesses playing a meaningful role in contributing to the development agenda?
Yes, and I think in the last 3 years, there's been a big change. The immediate reaction to the global economic crisis was to pull away from the pre-emerging market economies, to pull away from Africa. You know? And that proved a very false move, because actually Africa survived the global crisis very much intact. You know, this was the dog that didn't bark in the night. African economies did not fall apart because African governments had already got really rather robust economic policies. I was just in Rwanda last month. Inflation rate 1%, debt to GDP ratio 27%, fiscal deficit very much under control. I just addressed 250 global investors. I said, would you rather be holding the debt of Rwanda or the debt of Greece?
Paul, in the Business Call to Action initiative, companies are encouraged to combine commercial interests with development goals. Do you see a future for such business models amongst companies investing in the development world? And what types of policies could help to facilitate these investments?
Maybe there isn't such a strong dichotomy between profit, what's in the interest of the company, and what's in the interest of the development of the society. The latest evidence on what makes a company a good company, a successful company, tends to move away from the sort of cliche of the pre-crisis economy in which workers were incentivized by high-powered incentives. You monitor performance closely and you tie the incentives to that performance. So that's what you do with workers, and managers are terrified out of their minds by the threat of takeovers, so they look at the quarterly profit figures each quarter, just make as much as you can for the next quarter to avoid it. That might have been the cliche world before the crisis. We've now got a lot of evidence that that's a dumb way to run a company. Right? A lot of evidence. The Nobel laureate George Akerlof is now writing on how to motivate a workforce which stresses not monitoring and carrots dangled at the mouth of the donkey. Instead, what Akerlof emphasizes is that it's important to get the workforce to internalize the objectives of the firm, so that you get a workforce that doesn't need to be heavily monitored and incentivized because it actually believes in the objectives of the firm. That's what a successful company does around the world. Successful companies build loyal employees.
I'd like to move on and talk about your latest book, The Plundered Planet. In it, you focus on the impact of nature on the world's poorest nations. Now, for most poor countries, natural resources are their biggest asset, and yet exploitation of these resources often stymies social and environmental concerns. What can these countries do to exploit these resources in a way that balances both long-term growth and sustainable development?
Yes. First of all, sustainable development doesn't mean preservation. That's very important to recognize, right? If we preserve these societies in aspic, what we're preserving is poverty and despair. Right? So in these societies, it's all about transformation, about rapid change, lifting societies, lifting peoples out of a sense of despair and lack of opportunity into a world of opportunity, the modern world of opportunity. And over the course of a generation, that's possible now.
Paul, thank you for being with us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you indeed.
In London, this is Shivvy Jervis. Thank you for watching.